Hi, my name is Erin, and I'm going to be reading you The Sock Drawer Anomaly by Jeff Blackwell. Declan Maxwell Jones! Deck looked up in alarm. I'm coming to inspect that room of yours right now, his mother's voice continued from downstairs, and if it's not completely spotless, then I'm going to sell a non-essential bit of you for medical experiments. Deck swallowed, dropped his book, and looked around in despair. What he saw wasn't good. In fact, it was so far from good that even bad might be generous. A room in a house that had been in an earthquake and then in a landslide and which had been then looted and then stampeded by a herd of rabid wildebeest might be messier. A bit, but it would be close. Where had the time gone? His mother had given him an hour to tidy his room, and he'd intended to spend that time cleaning. He really had. It was just that the first thing he'd picked up had been his old, battered copy of The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, which he was rereading for about the zillionth time, and that little part of his brain which for some reason he hadn't learned to ignore yet had whispered seductively to him, "Go on, a couple pages won't hurt, you've got plenty of time." And he'd had plenty of time, only that had been about 59.5 minutes ago, and now he didn't. He now had something like 10 seconds. 10 seconds into which he had to cram an hour's worth of cleaning. He leapt off his bed and began shoveling piles of dirty laundry under it. "And if I find anything stuffed under your bed, I'll make it an essential bit," called his mother, displaying one of those astonishing but seriously annoying flashes of mind-reading she seemed to be capable of at the most inappropriate times. Dex started reefing clothes back out again, wondering briefly why he seemed to have more than he'd started with, and then remembered with a sinking feeling that last week's laundry was still under there as well. His shoulders slumped in defeat. With his under-the-bed fall black off limits and about 5 seconds left, things were looking pretty grim. His mother knocked. "Okay, Deck, open up. Let's see what that floor of yours looks like. It's been so long I've forgotten." "Coming, Mum," he replied, and getting dejectedly to his feet, he took a step towards the door. But as his mother hadn't been kidding about his floor going missing, he inadvertently stepped onto a skateboard, or at least onto his biology textbook, which was sitting on top of the skateboard, which had also gone MIA just shortly before the floor had. The skateboard went sailing across the room and cannoned into Deck's wastepaper basket, a basket which he had, via a combination of determination, spatial orientation, brute force, and extreme laziness, managed to cram approximately 6 times its intended capacity of rubbish. In sudden clear proof that Newton's third law of thermodynamics can sometimes be delayed, but never broken, a fountain of paper, chocolate wrappers, and other bits of junk cascaded out of the basket with an equal but opposite force to that which Deck had crammed them in with. Deck, meanwhile, went flying back in the opposite direction to the skateboard. He crashed into his desk, sending books, magazines, and assorted paraphernalia flying. He bounced off the desk, struggling to regain his balance as a pair of jeans, 2 shirts, and a dog leash wrapped around his legs, and clutched desperately at his bookcase. Big mistake. The bookcase was big and solid and looked immovable, but was so overstuffed with books that it was dangerously top-heavy. It swayed ominously and then slowly, ponderously began to fall. Desperately, Deck tried to lunge out of the way, but the knee-high tide of junk lapping around his legs tripped him. He tumbled to the floor and could only look up in horror as the bookcase's massive bulk accelerated towards him. He closed his eyes and braced for the impact. For a second, nothing happened. Then for another second, nothing kept on happening. Several more nothing-filled seconds crept by. The small part of Deck's brain which wasn't consumed with terror began to wonder what was going on. He wondered if he should open his eyes. On one hand, nothing was happening while they were closed, and compared to the something that had been about to happen, nothing seemed like a good option. On the other hand, vision was quite a useful attribute, and he was probably going to have to open his eyes again sometime. "You all right, kid?" Who'd said that? Slowly, cautiously, he opened one eye. No pain, no being squished. He opened the other. Still no squishing. For some reason, his bookshelf seemed to have just stopped short of turning him into a Deck pancake and was now hanging suspended just above him. Weird. And some strange voice was asking if he was all right. Weirder. A face appeared in the gap between the bookcase and the floor to his left. A face of a young man with blonde hair. He held out his hand. "Need some help?" For want of any better options, Deck took the proffered hand and extracted himself from under the almost horizontal bookcase. He started to say something, but the stranger was concentrating on some sort of device strapped to his wrist, and held up his other hand to stop him. He was tall and slim, and dressed in dark gray overalls, with the letters DCP embroidered on the sleeves and breast pocket. Dex said. The situation was so surreal he hadn't quite been sure of how to approach it. Who was this guy, and what was he doing in his room? Apart from somehow saving him from a deadly falling bookcase. Sorry to interrupt, but who are... Without warning, the stranger leapt at him and sent him crashing to the floor. The top drawer of Deck's bedside table flew open, and something small and pale came bursting out. It streaked across the room, right through the spot where Deck had been standing moments before, smacked into the wall, bounced off, and came hurtling back again. The blond stranger leapt to his feet, pulled something that looked like half-sized baseball bat out of a holster hanging from his belt, and smashed the flying object back across the room and into the cupboard, which, as usual, Deck had left open. The stranger lunged over to the door, slammed it shut, and then wedged Deck's desk chair against it. The door began to rattle and shake, but the chair held firm. The stranger turned over to Deck, who was sitting speechless amongst the junk on the floor. Sorry about that, kid. Now, what were you saying? He put his bat back in the holster and sat down on a pile of dirty laundry. Oh yeah, that's right, you were asking who I am. Link's the name. Link Delphson. I'm an equilibrian from the Department of Continuum Preservation. Said Deck. I'm Deck. Deciding that sounded a bit lame, he added, I'm a kid. Sadly, once he'd said it, he realized that sounded even lamer. What's an equilibrian? You don't know? Yowzers, I must have come back a long way. He consulted the device on his wrist again. Okay, right, 21st century, that explains it. Deck, an equilibrian is someone whose job is to maintain the integrity of the space-time continuum. Deck processed that. The space-time continuum, he said? Yes. You maintain it? Yes. Its integrity? Yes. Deck processed some more. Maybe I should let my mother in. The integrity of the space-time continuum sounds like a bit like a grown-up thing to me. Link shook his head. Deck, no one can come in here until we sort out the breach. The breach? Queried Deck, not liking the sound of that very much. That's why I'm here, replied Link. You've got a level 2 breach in your drawer over there, and the department has sent me to sort it out. A breach? In my sock drawer? Deck shook his head. Look, I'm sorry, but I've got no idea what you're talking about, and I was kind of already in big trouble even before you arrived. I really should let Mum in, 'cause she must be wondering what's going on, and thanks for helping me with the bookcase and all that, even though I'm not sure how you did that, but, thanks anyway, and I'd really have to be going now. He started edging towards the door. Link sighed. Look, Deck, I'm sorry, but you can't leave, and your Mum can't come in. Not yet, anyway. This room is sealed, and will be until the breach is secure. I've thrown a field of slow time over the area, so as far as your Mum is concerned, virtually no time has passed since I arrived anyway, and the same goes for everyone and everything else in the area. Apart from us, that is. How do you think you got out from under that bookcase? It hasn't stopped falling, it's just doing it about 1,000,000 times more slowly now than it was before I activated the field. I normally wouldn't exempt any locals when I'm cleaning up a breach because the less witnesses the better, but in your case it was either that or seeing you end up as a stain in the carpet. Slow time? Said Deck, nodding and edging faster towards the door. Okay, now I understand perfectly. Clearly, Link had some reality issues to work through, and Deck decided he'd prefer to leave him to it. Link smiled. You think I'm nuts, don't you? Okay, how do you explain that? He asked, pointing. Deck looked to where he'd indicated. It took him a moment to comprehend what he was seeing, but when he did, his jaw dropped, his eyes bulged, and his stomach did some somersaults. His brain was so busy directing these various acrobatics that he forgot about his legs, which folded under him and deposited him gently back on the floor. What he was looking at was at his waste paper basket. His skateboard had sent it flying, he remembered that. The thing was, it didn't seem to have stopped yet, flying that is. It hung suspended in midair, with an airborne spray of rubbish still spreading around it. How are you doing that? I told you, said Link. Slow time. It's not floating, it's just falling very, very slowly. Time has slowed down for everything in this area, except you and me. Understand? No? Link sighed again. Look, it's very simple, he frowned. Actually, it's horribly complex, but I'll give you the super simple summarized version, okay? Deck nodded. What else could he do? Deck, I'm from the future, a long way into the future. And in the future, the human race has done some stuff which caused weaknesses to develop in the space-time continuum of our universe. Now, when one of those weaknesses coincides with a highly chaotic area, a breach can develop. A doorway, if you like. A doorway to where? Asked Deck. Anywhere, replied Link. Another place, another time, another universe, anywhere. Breaches are incredibly dangerous and need to be resealed ASAP. That's where the Department of Continuum Preservation comes in. We monitor the continuum, and whenever a breach is detected, an equilibrium like me is sent in to reseal it and clean up the mess. And we have some handy high-tech future stuff like slow time to help us. You said that these breaches form in chaotic areas. Deck looked around. So you mean? Link grinned and nodded. Deck swallowed. My room got so messy it broke the universe? Basically, yep. Okay, so how do we fix it? Already being done, replied Link, looking at the device on his wrist. The DCP is channeling a bidirectional gravitational barrier through the QDA here, which will seal it up. QDA? Asked Deck. Quantum Digital Assistant, said Link, and then, seeing the look on Deck's face, don't ask. Anyway, the breach is being held just fractionally open until we send our visitor in the cupboard over there back through, then it can be shut. Deck had completely forgot about the mysterious flying object, which was still rattling the cupboard door furiously. What is it, anyway? Hard to be sure, but I think it's a fairy. A fairy? Exclaimed Deck. Yeah, but not the kind you're thinking of. Fairies are genetic mutations gone wrong from the distant future. They've somehow gotten loose in the continuum of whenever and wherever they're from and pop into our universe occasionally. They're small, fast, mean, and very tough. In any case, it doesn't belong here. It needs to be sent back to where it came from. How? Well, being extra-dimensional, it's not affected by the slow time field, so we're going to do it old school, Link replied, pulling his club out of the holster. He moved over to the cupboard. Okay, watch yourself, he warned, pulling the chair out of the way and reefing open the door. The fairy streaked out and Link swung, but it swerved and he only caught it at a glancing blow. It spun crazily towards Deck and landed with a crash beside him. Deck looked down at it in wonder. The tiny figure was about 10 centimeters long and dressed in a pale, loose-fitting outfit. On its back were a pair of gossamer wings, which twitched as the fairy shook its head and got unsteadily back up to its feet. It is a fairy, breathed Deck. The next thing he knew, he was pinned against the wall, and with a tiny bearded face just millimeters from his own. Who you callin' a fairy? The creature growled, drawing back one of its fists. Sorry, stammered Deck, astonished by its strength. You will be, the fairy replied in its remarkably deep voice. For future reference, we prefer genetically modified winged humanoids of the short stature, okay? It grinned evilly. Not that you have much of a future. The tiny fist swung towards him, and Deck braced for the impact, but before he could find out what it was like to be beaten up like a fairy, Link smacked it with the club again. The blow sent it spiraling in a spiraling arc across the room, and into the open sock drawer it had originally burst from. Link slammed it shut, and after a few seconds of frenzied rattling, there was silence. He glanced at his QDA. Okay, all sealed. He walked over to Deck, who had collapsed in a heap on the floor, and helped him to his feet. Deck, I've got to go, so I'll make this quick. Don't tell anybody about this. Nobody would believe you, and even if they did, it would just cause trouble. Trust me. I really shouldn't do this, but I'll leave the slow time field on for another hour, so you can clean up before your mom comes in. He pressed some buttons on his QDA. Oh, and one more thing. The breach has been sealed, but the weakness in the continuum is still there. If things get chaotic enough, it could open again. He grinned. So keep your room tidy, okay? There was a flash of blue light, and he was gone. Deck blinked and stood motionless for a few seconds. Then he started tidying, like he'd never tidied before. The end.